Good day, students, and welcome to our arts lesson this fourth quarter period. This lesson will cover Module 1 and Module 2 of Arts this fourth quarter. The main focus of this lesson is all about the history of Western classical plays and operas, as well as the famous composers and their works. At the end of this discussion, I will be showing the activities you need to answer. So listen carefully in the discussion and take down notes of the important details that may help you in answering the modules. Let's now begin with the lesson. Let's begin with the history of the theatrical forms and their evolution. Theater began from myth, ritual, and ceremony. Early society perceived connections between actions performed by groups of people or leaders to a certain society, and these actions moved from habit to tradition to ritual to ceremony due to human desire and need for entertainment. The repeated rehearsals, performances, and creation of different actions broke the ground for theater. Theater means place of seeing, but it is more than the buildings where performance take place. To produce theater, a playwright writes the scripts, the director rehearses the performers, the designer and technical crew produce props to create the scenes, and actors and actresses perform on the stage. Then, it will only be a true theater act when an audience witnesses it. Before we proceed to discover how to organize and perform in a theater, we have to acquire information on the important periods and events in theater history. Let us now study the theatrical forms of the different art periods. The first one is the ancient theaters, specifically the Greek and Roman theater during 700 BCE to 410 CE. European theater began in ancient Greece. It began around 700 BC with festivals honoring their many gods. One god, Dionysus, with a religious festival called the Cult of Dionysus to honor Dionysus, the god of wine and fertility. The city-state of Athens was the center of a significant cultural, political, and military power during this period, where the festivals and competitions were usually performed. The three well-known Greek tragedy playwrights are Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus. The theater of ancient Greece consisted of three types of drama: tragedy, comedy, and satyr play. Tragedy is a compound of two Greek words, tragos or goat, and ode meaning song, referring to goats sacrificed to Dionysus before performances or to goat skins worn by the performers. In Greece, tragedy was the most admired type of play. It dealt with tragic events and had an unhappy ending, especially one concerning the downfall of the main character. Thespis was the first actor and introduced the use of masks and was called the father of tragedy. Comedy plays were derived from imitation. There were no traces of their origin. Aristophanes wrote most of the comedy plays. Out of these 11 plays, Lysistrata survived, a humorous tale about a strong woman who led a female coalition to end war in Greece. Cyclops was an adventurous comedy by Euripides. Satyr play contains comic elements to lighten the overall mood, or a serious play with a happy ending. The satyr play was a short, light-hearted tale piece performed after each trilogy of the tragedies. It is an ancient Greek form of tragic comedy. It featured choruses of satyrs based on Greek mythology and with pretended drunkenness, bold sexuality including phallic props, tricks, and sight jokes. This featured half-man and half-goat characters known as satyrs. They were awful, ridiculous, and usually drunk. The satyr characters lusted after everyone on stage, and they delivered the most humorous lines often at the expense of others. Let us now define the different ancient theater terms. Theater buildings were called theatron. The theaters were large, open-air structures constructed on the slopes of hills. They consisted of three main elements: the orchestra, the scene, and the audience. Orchestra is a large circular or rectangular area at the center part of the theater where the play, dance, religious rites, and acting took place. Here is a sample illustration of the Greek theater with its different parts. Let's now proceed to the Roman theater. The theater of ancient Rome started in the 3rd century BC. It had varied and interesting art forms like festival performances of street theater, acrobatics, the staging of comedies of Plautus, and the high verbally elaborate tragedies of Seneca. Although Rome had a native tradition of performance, the Hellenization or historical spread of ancient Greek culture of Roman culture in the 3rd century BC had an intense and energizing effect on Roman theater and encouraged the development of Latin literature. According to Roman historian Livy, in the 4th century BC, the Etruscan actors were the first experienced live theater. While in 240 BC, Roman drama began with the plays of Livius Andronicus, and it remained popular throughout late antiquity. And by the mid-4th century AD, 102 out of 176 ludi publici being dedicated to theater, besides a considerably lower number of gladiator and chariot racing events. Greek theaters had a great influence on the Roman theater. The Triumvir Pompey was one of the first permanent non-wooden theaters in Rome, whose structure was somewhat similar to the Theatron of Athens. The building was a part of a multi-use complex that included a large quadriporticus or a columned quadrangle directly behind the scanave front, an elaborately decorated background of theater stage, enclosed by the large columned porticos with an expansive garden complex of fountains and statues. There were rooms also that were dedicated to the exposition of art and other works collected by Pompey Magnus, which were located along the stretch of covered arcade. Here is a sample image of the Theater of Pompey or the Triumvir Pompey. The usual themes for Roman theater plays were chariots races, gladiators, and public executions. The Romans loved a good spectacle. They loved to watch combat, admired blood sports, and gladiator competition. The more realistic the violence, the more it pleased Roman audiences. The Christians, however, opposed the barbaric themes of the plays and closed all theaters. Comedy plays were popular too in the Roman theater from 350 to 250 BC, and women were allowed to perform on stage. This time, let us now proceed to the different medieval theater which started from 500 CE to 1400. During the medieval era, theater performances were not allowed throughout Europe. To keep the theater alive, minstrels, though denounced by the church, performed in markets, public places, and festivals. They traveled from one town to another as puppeteers, jugglers, storytellers, dancers, singers, and other theatrical acts. These minstrels were viewed as dangerous and pagan. Churches in Europe started staging their own theater performances during Easter Sundays with biblical stories and events. Eventually, some plays were brought outside the church due to their portrayal of the devil and hell. An example of this kind of play is the Mystère d'Adam or the Mystery of Adam. The story revolves around Adam and Eve and ends with the devil capturing and bringing them to hell. Over the centuries, the plays revolved around biblical themes from the story of the creation to the Last Judgment. Let us now proceed to the Renaissance Theater, which started in the year 1400 up to 1600. Renaissance theater arts were characterized by a return of classical Greek and Roman arts and culture. During Middle Ages, mystery plays formed a part of religious festivals in England and other parts of Europe during the Renaissance period. Morality plays, in which the protagonist was met by personifications of various moral attributes who tried to choose a godly life over the evil, and the university drama were formed to create Athenian tragedy. Public theaters were developed like the Commedia dell'arte, an Italian comedy and a humorous theatrical presentation performed by professional players who traveled in troupes, and the elaborate masks, a dramatic entertainment consisting of pantomime, dancing, dialogue, and song, and sometimes players wore masks that were usually presented in court. One of the most prominent supporters of the theater was Queen Elizabeth I. The companies of players, or the companies of actors, were organized by the aristocrats and performed seasonally in many places. They were called professional players that performed on the Elizabethan stage. The tours of these players gradually replaced the performances of the mystery and morality plays by local players. Gorboduc, authors were Thomas Norton and Thomas Sackville, also known as Ferex and Porrex, was an English play and first performed at the Christmas celebration in 1561 and performed before Queen Elizabeth I on January 18, 1562 by the Gentlemen of the Inner Temple, which was one of the 4 inns of court professional associations for barristers and judges in London. The famous actor and poet who emerged in this period was William Shakespeare. He was baptized on April 26, 1564 and died on April 23, 1616. He was an English poet, playwright, and actor, and regarded as the greatest writer and dramatist in the whole world. Shakespeare was often called England's national poet and the Bard of Avon. His works consist of about 38 plays. Some of these plays were well-loved Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Midsummer Night's Dream, Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, Much Ado About Nothing. The 4 tragedies considered to be Shakespeare's greatest works were Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. Other contemporary playwrights like Christopher Marlowe, tragedies such as Dr. Faustus and The Jew of Malta, and Thomas Kyd, The Spanish Tragedy. The history plays depicted English or European history. Shakespeare's plays were about the lives of kings such as Richard III and Henry V, Christopher Marlowe's Edward II, and George Peele's famous Chronicles of King Edward I. Comedies were common too. This dealt with life in London after the fashion of Roman New Comedy. Some of comedy plays were The Shoemaker's Holiday by Thomas Dekker and A Chaste Maid in Cheapside by Thomas Middleton. For the first time, ballet was performed in public during this period. Ballet is a formalized form of dance which originated from the Italian Renaissance courts. It developed and flourished from Italy to France with the help of Catherine de' Medici, the Queen of France. An early example of Catherine's development of ballet is through Le Paradis d'Amour, a piece of work presented at her daughter's wedding, Marguerite de Valois to Henry of Navarre. Money of the aristocrats was responsible for the initial stages of court ballet, for the aristocrats' entertainment. The first formal court ballet ever recognized was Ballet des Polonaises in 1573, a true form of royal entertainment. Ballet des Polonaises was commissioned by Catherine de' Medici to honor the Polish ambassadors who visited Paris for the enthronement of King Henry in Poland. Here are some innovations of the stage in the Renaissance theater. First, proscenium was developed. This is the area of a theater surrounding the stage opening. Arches frame and divide the stage from the audience. Second, backdrops for scenery were popularized by the art of painting clothes. Third, commedia dell'arte or comedy of the profession was developed. It was quick-witted performance of the characters or players. Let us now proceed to the Baroque Theater in the year 1600 to 1750. The theater of the Baroque period is marked by the use of technology in current Broadways or commercial plays. The theater crew uses machines for special effects and scene changes which may be changed in a matter of seconds with the use of ropes and pulleys. This technology affected the content of the performed pieces, practicing at its best the deus ex machina, a Latin word meaning God from the machine solution, in which the character gods were finally able to come down from the heavens and rescue the hero in dangerous situations. As a result, the theater was richly decorated. The multiplicity of plot turns and a variety of situations characteristic of mannerism, a variety of approaches or intellectual sophistication, as well as using artificial qualities of the play, were succeeded by opera. The use of theatrical technologies in the Baroque period may be seen in the films Vatel in the year 2000 and Farinelli in the year 1999, and in the different stage productions of Orpheus by Claudio Monteverdi. Let us now go to the Neoclassical Theater in the year 1800 to 1900. The Neoclassical period was a movement where the styles of Roman and Greek societies influenced the theater arts. During the Neoclassical period, the theater was characterized by its grandiosity. Costumes and sceneries were highly elaborate. The main concepts of the plays were to entertain and to teach lessons. Stages were restyled with dramatic arches to highlight the scenes. Multiple entry points on the stage were evident in many plays. Lighting and sound effects intensified the mood and message of each scene, enhancing the dramatic experience. The idea of changing scenery and backdrops became more noticeable, particularly with the innovation of pulley systems that allowed parts to move more quickly across the stage. The concept of decorum, meaning right and proper audience behavior, was applied in this period, which means classical concepts and appropriate social behavior must be observed. This period officially established just two types of plays, tragedy and comedy. They never mixed these together, and the restriction led to the use of the now well-known pair of happy and sad masks that symbolized the theatrical arts. Tragedies portrayed the complex and fateful lives of the upper classes and royals, while comedies, which were either public discourse or comedies of manners, tended to focus on the lower ranks of society. Observance to these genres was critical to a play's success. Three playwrights achieved a significant amount of success. Pierre Corneille, 1606 to 1684, was often called the father of the French tragedy, writing scripts for more than 4 decades. One of these was The Cid. Jean-Baptiste Poquelin, better known as Molière, 1622 to 1673, was known for his comedies. Tartuffe and the Misanthropy was one of his works. Jean Racine, 1639 to 1699, was a tragedian beloved for his simple approach to action and the linguistic rhythms and effects he achieved. Andromache and Phaedra was one of his scripts. These men were able to take elements from classical Greek and Roman literature and transform them into plays. Here are some trivia about the Neoclassical Theater. The first spotlight was used in the US during this period and was called the limelight. The Theater Regulation Act of 1843 banned drinking in legitimate theaters. Many tavern owners took advantage of the situation and renovated their establishments to accommodate live performances. Let us now explore the Romantic Theater in the year 1800 to year 2000. During the Romantic period, melodrama and operas became the most popular theatrical forms. Melodrama originated from the French word melodrame, which is derived from the Greek melos, which means music, and French drame, which is derived from the Greek dran, meaning to perform. Melodrama can be also described as a dramatic work that puts characters in a lot of danger in order to appeal to the emotions and in which orchestral music or song was used to accompany the action. Opera, on the other hand, is an art form in which singers and musicians perform a dramatic work combining text, called a libretto, and musical score. Such as acting, scenery, and costumes and dance were important elements of theater. It is usually performed in an opera house, accompanied by an orchestra or smaller musical ensemble. Victor Marie Hugo, who was one of the most famous Romantic playwrights, was born on February 26, 1802 and died on May 22, 1885. He is considered one of the greatest and best-known French writers. He was a poet, novelist, and dramatist of the Romantic movement. Hugo's literary fame comes from his poetry, novels, and his dramatic achievements. Among his works that stand out all over the world are Les Contemplations, La Légende des Siècles, Les Miserables, and Notre-Dame de Paris, which is known as the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Quasimodo, a deformed hunchback, the bell ringer of Notre Dame, had a good heart of help Esmeralda, a beautiful gypsy street dancer with a kind and generous heart. Esmeralda captured the hearts of many men that had always wanted to own her. There are several playwrights that had been known in this period, such as Charles Nodier, George Sand, Heinrich von Kleist, Ludwig Uhland, and many more. Georges Bizet, who was one of the famous Romantic composers, was born on October 25, 1838 and died on June 3, 1875 in Paris. He entered the Paris Conservatory of Music a fortnight before his 10th birthday. His first symphony, the Symphony in C major, was written when he was 17 years old. The symphony had an amazing stylistic resemblance to the music of Franz Schubert. This French composer was a pianist and best known for his operas. Carmen is the most popular among his works. Bizet composed the title role for a mezzo-soprano in the character of Carmen. The opera tells the story of the downfall of Don Jose, a naive soldier who is seduced by the charms of the sizzling gypsy, Carmen. His contemporary composers during the Romantic period were Franz Liszt, Richard Wagner, Frederick Chopin, Ludwig van Beethoven, Franz Schubert, Felix Mendelssohn, and Hector Berlioz. This time, let's discover the different famous Western classical plays and opera. First, from the Greeks, we have the playwright named Sophocles. Sophocles is an ancient Greek tragedian. His contemporary playwrights were Aeschylus and Euripides. Sophocles wrote 123 plays, but only 7 have survived in a complete form. These are Ajax, Antigone, The Women of Trachis, Oedipus the King, Electra, Philoctetes, and Oedipus at Colonus. For almost 50 years in the dramatic competitions of the city-state of Athens that took place during the religious festivals of the Lamia and the Dionysia, Sophocles was the most famous playwright. He won first place in 24 out of 30 competitions and was never judged lower than second place. Aeschylus won 14 competitions and was sometimes defeated by Sophocles, while Euripides won only 4 competitions. The most famous tragedies of Sophocles were Oedipus and Antigone. They were known as the Theban plays, although each play was actually a part of a different tetralogy. Sophocles influenced the development of the drama, most importantly by adding a third actor, and he developed his characters to a greater importance than the chorus in the presentation of the plot. One of the most famous plays written by Sophocles is the Oedipus Rex, and here are its main characters: Oedipus, the king of Thebes; Creon, Oedipus' brother-in-law; Eurydice, Creon's wife; Apollo, god or oracle of Delphi; King Laius, father of Oedipus; Jocasta, mother and wife of Oedipus; Polynices and Eteocles, sons of Oedipus; Tiresias, the blind prophet; Polybus, Oedipus' foster father; Merope, Oedipus' foster mother; Antigone and Ismene, the daughters of Oedipus; Haemon, Antigone's lover; Sphinx, the half-human, half-lion that symbolizes plague and misfortune. Here are the theatrical elements of Oedipus Rex. Its genre is tragedy. Number of characters per play, 1 to 3 characters only, but they can portray other characters. The chorus consists of 12 members, all of whom wore identical masks since they were supposed to be of like mind and opinion. The use of masks acts to advance the universality of the themes and the dramatic impact of the events, and to keep the audience from being distracted by the actual physical attributes of the actors. Oedipus wore a gold mask with exaggerated, deep, empty eye sockets. Jocasta was the wife of Laius and mother of Oedipus. The expression of her mask depends on the scene of the play. Antigone and Ismene, white face, dark under the eyes, and sad-looking. Creon, brother-in-law of Oedipus, mad or angry facial expression with a crown. For the gestures and movements, facial expression was of no importance to Greek actors since they were always masked. For music, Sophocles also used the chorus at the beginning of the play to help the audience the given circumstances of the play. Choruses did a lot of lamenting of terrible events. For the costumes, men wore loose floor-length poncho with pleated shoulder while females wore draped robes. For the staging, the Parthenon's facade has the design of Ionic order columns with cornice and moldings on the top and elevated by 5-step risers at the center, and has a platform in front near the audience. Under the Renaissance period, we have the most famous play by William Shakespeare entitled Romeo and Juliet. Its genre is tragedy. William Shakespeare was born and baptized on April 26, 1564 and died on April 23, 1616. Shakespeare was born and brought up in Stratford-upon-Avon. At the age of 18, he married Anne Hathaway, with whom he had 3 children, Susanna, and twins Hamnet and Judith. He was an English poet and playwright, widely known as the greatest writer in the English language and the world's preeminent dramatist. He's been known also as the Bard of Avon. His existing works consist of about 38 plays, 154 sonnets, and 2 long narrative poems. Between 1585 and 1592, Shakespeare began a successful career in London as an actor, writer, and part owner of a playing company called the Lord Chamberlain's Men, later known as the King's Men. He appears to have retired to Stratford around 1613 at age 49, where he died 3 years later. With the exception of Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare's most famous tragedy and one of the world's most enduring love stories, William Shakespeare's early plays were mostly histories written in the early 1590s. Shakespeare also wrote several comedies during his early period, and these are A Midsummer Night's Dream, Merchant of Venice, Much Ado About Nothing, As You Like It, Twelfth Night, Titus Andronicus, The Comedy of Errors, The Taming of the Shrew, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, and his later works are tragedies and tragicomedies, which are Hamlet, King Lear, and Othello. Here are the main characters of Romeo and Juliet written by William Shakespeare. For the Montagues family, Romeo, sole heir to the Montagues' fortune, Lord Montague, Romeo's father, Lady Montague, Romeo's mother, Benvolio, Romeo's cousin, Balthazar, Romeo's faithful servant, Abraham, Montague's servant Capulet's family, Juliet, sole heir to the Capulet fortune, Lord Capulet, Juliet's father, Lady Capulet, Juliet's mother, Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, the nurse, Juliet's faithful nurse, Peter, Capulet's servant, Samson and Gregory, also Capulet's servant. And for the other characters, we have Friar Lawrence, friend and advisor to Romeo and Juliet, Mercutio, Romeo's best friend and princess kinsman, Prince Escalus, Prince of Verona and kinsman to Mercutio and Paris, Paris loves Juliet, Rosaline, Romeo's first love who never actually appears in the play, Friar John, Friar Lawrence's friend, and the apothecary, Romeo's acquaintance in Mantua. Here are the theatrical elements for Romeo and Juliet. For the staging, the stage itself was divided into 3 levels: a main stage area with doors at the rear and a curtained area at the back for discovery scenes, an upper canopied area called Heaven for balcony scenes, and an area under the stage called Hell, which could be accessed through a trapdoor in the stage. There is no curtain in the front of the stage, which meant that scenes had to flow into each other and dead bodies had to be dragged off. There are dressing rooms located behind the stage. For the costumes are based on the style and design of dresses worn during the Renaissance period. Here are some examples in the pictures. One of the most famous opera in the Romantic period was entitled Carmen, which was written by Georges Bizet. The setting of Carmen takes place in Seville, Spain during the mid-19th century. The main characters are Carmen, soprano, Don Jose, tenor, El Dancairo, baritone, El Remendado, tenor, Escamillo, baritone, Frasquita, mezzo-soprano, Mercedes, mezzo-soprano, Micaela, soprano, Morales, bass, and Zuniga, bass. Here is a brief history of Carmen. The opera Carmen is one of the world's most popular operas. It was first performed at the Opéra Comique in Paris in France on March 3, 1875. The opera was in 4 acts with the music written by the French composer Georges Bizet. The libretto written by Henry Mailhac and Ludovic Halévy was based on a novel of the same title by Prosper Mérimée. For the staging, the story is set in Seville, Spain, and the surrounding hills in 1820. The opera written in the genre of opera comique, with the musical numbers separated by dialogue, tells the story of the downfall of Don Jose, a naive soldier who is seduced by the charms of the flaming gypsy Carmen. No man could resist Carmen's charms, and when she was ready to move on, watch out. The opera is a fascinating drama of love and jealousy, filled with famously alluring melodies and captivating dancing. The story has been the subject of many screen and stage adaptations. And that was all for the different famous Western classical plays and operas. Now let's move on to the different famous Filipino playwrights and their compositions. First on the list we have Francisco Balagtas. Francisco Balagtas E. de la Cruz was born on April 2, 1788 in Panginay, Bigaa, Bulacan and died on February 20, 1862 of pneumonia. He was also known as Francisco Baltazar. His best-known work is the Florence at Laura. Francisco Balagtas was the youngest of the 4 children of Juan Balagtas, a blacksmith, and Juana de la Cruz. He studied in a parochial school in Bigaa and later in Manila. During his childhood years, Francisco worked as houseboy in Tondo, Manila. Balagtas learned to write poetry from Jose de la Cruz, called as Joseng Sisiu, one of the most famous poets of Tondo. It was de la Cruz himself who personally challenged Balagtas to improve his writing. In 1835, Balagtas moved to Pandacan where he met Maria Asuncion Rivera, who served as the muse for his future works. She is referenced in Florence at Laura as Celia and Mare. Balagtas' affections for Mare were challenged by the influential Mariano Capule. Capule won the battle when he used his wealth to get Balagtas imprisoned under the accusation that Balagtas ordered a servant girl's head to be shaved. It was in prison that he wrote Florence at Laura so that the events of the poem were meant to parallel his own situation. Balagtas published Florence at Laura upon his release in 1838. He moved to Balanga, Bataan in 1840, where he served as the assistant to Justice of Peace and later in 1856 as Major Lieutenant. He died on February 20, 1862 at the age of 73. On his deathbed, he asked a favor that none of his children become a poet like him, who had suffered under his gift. He even told them it would be better to cut their hands off than let them be writers. Balagtas is so greatly revered in the Philippines that the term for Filipino debate in extemporaneous verse is named after him, Balagtasan, and one of the greatest literary awards in the Philippines is also named after him. Next one, we have another Filipino playwright named Severino R. Reyes. He is the father of the Tagalog zarzuela. He is the son of Rufino Reyes and Andrea Rivera. Reyes was born in Santa Cruz, Manila on February 11, 1861. He studied at San Juan de Letran College and later at the University of Santo Tomas, where he studied philosophy. A Filipino writer, dramatist, and playwright, Reyes was highly acclaimed as one of the giants of Tagalog literature. In 1902, Reyes founded and directed the Gran Compañía de Zarzuela Tagala. On June 14, 1902, the company staged his play, Walangsugat, or No Wounds, a drama set against the historical events in Bulacan during the Philippine Revolution. In 1923, Reyes co-founded the Liwayway, a Tagalog literary weekly which published a series of fairy tales titled Mga Kwento ni Lola Basyang, written by Reyes. The storyteller, Lola Basyang, was based by the author on a neighbor named Gervasia de Guzman. Severino Reyes died on September 15, 1942, when the Philippines was under the Japanese regime. Severino Reyes' masterpiece, Walangsugat, broadly underscores the injustice of Spanish rule even as it dances around the cruel fate of the young lovers Tenyong and Julia, with humor and song. Set in the final leg of the Philippine Revolution, Tenyong is forced to leave behind his childhood sweetheart Julia to join the Katipunan. Meanwhile, Julia's mother pressures her into marrying the wealthy Miguel instead. With no word from Tenyong as the battle prolongs, Julia gives in, but her wedding is interrupted by the fatally wounded Tenyong. He mentions his dying wish to Julia, and the play features an unexpected twist that shows how Tenyong was able to outwit the person separating him from his beloved Julia. The production was directed by Ricardo Abad under the musical direction of Josefino Toledo. John Villarreal handled lights design while Dexter Santos choreographed. Set and costumes were designed by national artist Salvador Bernal. Next one, we have a famous Filipino director named Dr. Ricardo J Bad. Born in Manila on August 10, 1946 of parents from Cavite and Camiguin. Graduated at the Ateneo de Manila, after which he obtained a Fulbright grant to finish a doctorate in sociology at Fordham University in New York. A full-time faculty, Department of Sociology and Anthropology, Artistic Director, Tanghalang Ateneo Metrobank Network of Outstanding Teachers Pathways, Ateneo de Manila University Role Players, Theater for Life Social Weather Stations. He has been involved as actor and director in over 120 productions while at the same time doing sociological work as teacher, researcher, and editor. He has also directed and acted for professional companies like Teatro Pilipino and Tanghalang Pilipino at the Cultural Center of the Philippines and the Metropolitan Theater. The Theater Guild, many of his theater productions were classics of Western drama, but in terms of a Filipino and ancient sensibility, like Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. And finally, we have Salvador F Benal. He is known as the father of theater design in the Philippines. He was born in 1945 to a family that ran a Terno shop. He was the first to develop theater design as a profession and elevated it to an art form. He studied at Ateneo de Manila and at Northwestern University, Evanston, Illinois, USA, practiced and handled courses in the art and craft of theater design. He taught briefly at Ateneo de Manila and University of the Philippines. He had designed more than 250 productions in ballet, theater, and film. He is also a National Artist Awardee. And that ends our lesson for the fourth quarter of Arts today. I hope you learned a lot about the different Western classical plays and operas and the different famous Filipino playwrights. Now, as I said earlier, I will show you the activities that you need to answer in your Arts Module 1 and Module 2. We have a total of 2 art modules this quarter, and please make sure that you will finish all your activities. Alright, that ends our lesson for today. If you have any questions about the lesson or the activities, you can reach me through these posted social media platforms. Thank you all for listening and see you in our next lesson.